When you envision a gangster from the Prohibition era, the image that likely comes to mind includes Tommy guns, pinstripe suits, and vicious turf battles. But what if I revealed that the most intriguing aspect of these individuals wasn't merely the illicit activities they engaged in, but rather the totally bizarre, shockingly absurd, and downright eccentric behaviors they exhibited behind closed doors? We're gearing up to unveil the 33 most peculiar gangster habits that reveal how the most feared figures in history were also some of the most ludicrous. 1. So you believe that prison is intended to serve as a form of punishment? How quaint. For elite gangsters, receiving a prison sentence felt less like incarceration and more akin to entering an ultra-secure, all-inclusive paradise where the guards act as your personal attendants. They habitually transformed their cells into lavish suites that would leave any Manhattan real estate agent envious. For instance, Al Capone's cell resembled more of a wealthy grandfather's study after hitting the jackpot than a traditional prison cell. We're talking about plush carpets, elegant armchairs, and a radio worth more than the warden's vehicle. They received sumptuous steak dinners, enjoyed the finest cigars, and essentially managed their criminal enterprises through a correspondingly well-compensated team of correctional officers. It's the ultimate display of authority. You're not merely evading the law. You're redecorating its waiting area and compelling its employees to fetch you slippers. 2. Some gangsters possessed a knack for pettiness that could easily earn a gold medal, exemplified by the absurd practice of sending flowers to the funerals of those they utterly despised. But these weren't just any flowers. We're referring to colossal, extravagant floral displays that seem to shout, "Sorry for your loss." By the way, I might have had a hand in causing it. One individual dispatched a 6-foot-tall bouquet shaped like a middle finger crafted from roses. Another sent orchids that spelled out, "He should have ducked." This wasn't an expression of sympathy. It was gangster trolling with floral arrangements. Picture the unfortunate funeral director attempting to place a bouquet resembling that of a Mafia-themed wedding gone off the rails. And the cherry on top? These gangsters signed the cards. No room for mystery or subtlety. Just glorious mockery, wrapped in baby's breath and passive aggression. 3. Imagine, if you will, a group of individuals named Knuckles Frankie, 2 Times, and Jimmy the Weasel, whose understanding of culture consists of knowing which gun produces the loudest bang, being compelled to endure a 3-hour opera. This wasn't a hoax, it was a compulsory corporate outing for certain mob families. The crime lords, eager to portray sophistication, often dragged their thugs to the opera in an effort to instill some semblance of class. You can easily envision them sweating in their tuxedos, squirming, and attempting to appear profoundly moved by a high note, all while ruminating on the hit they need to carry out post-performance. You can almost hear the boss whisper, "Seem entranced by Puccini?" Or you might just become the tragic conclusion of this opera. It represented the most clumsy, excruciating rebranding attempt in existence. 4. You might expect that men who fashioned empires based on cold, hard rationale would trust their own instincts. Right. Wrong. They exhibited an odd tendency to delegate their most crucial business moves to psychics and fortune tellers. Forget about Wall Street experts. These individuals had Madame Olga on speed dial. We're talking about merciless killers seated in a dimly lit chamber, earnestly consulting a woman with a crystal ball regarding the cosmic alignment for a drive-by shooting. Madame Zora. Should I invest in this illegal distillery? Or is Mercury in retrograde going to ruin my profit margins? These men wouldn't entrust even their own mothers with the whereabouts of their secret stash. Yet they'd wager their entire operation on a tarot card interpretation. It's a remarkable degree of paranoia that highlights their deep-rooted awareness that their lives were merely one unfortunate Tuesday shy of catastrophe. 5. Gangster vanity was astronomical, and they had a penchant for emblazoning their initials on all manner of items. Silk shirts, elaborate cars, absolutely. But the real show of pride, having their firearms monogrammed, indeed. They splurged to have their initials elegantly engraved on the pearl grip of the weapon they intended to wield during a crime. This exemplifies a level of audacity that is simply breathtaking. It's not simply committing an offense. It's signing it. It's akin to a bank robber spray painting his full name across the vault door. It utterly undermines the essence of being a criminal. Yet it served as the ultimate exhibition of narcissistic authority. The implication was not merely, "You're dead." It was, "You've been dispatched by someone with taste and exceedingly questionable judgment." 6. A gangster's vehicle was not merely a mode of transport. It served as a mobile fortress equipped with a roaring V8 engine. They often had their Cadillacs meticulously crafted into impenetrable strongholds. We're referring to bulletproof glass so dense that looking through it was nearly impossible. Steel armor plates were embedded in the doors, along with more hidden compartments than a magician's coat. They had concealed slots for Tommy guns, drop-down panels for rear firing, and occasionally even oil slick dispensers. This was not some pimp my ride scenario. This was pimp my hearse in advance. Al Capone's notorious Cadillac was decked out in the exact same green as the police cars. Just to add another layer of confusion and sheer intimidation, it was the ultimate proclamation. You may try to take me down, but I have already invested a small fortune, making your efforts incredibly frustrating. 7. The fundamental rule of being a criminal is to maintain a low profile. These individuals took that guideline, set it ablaze, and used it as a light for their cigars at the city's most upscale nightclub. They were notoriously public in their actions. They weren't lurking in some dingy warehouse. They were ringside for the grandest boxing matches, commanding attention at the finest tables in the trendiest restaurants, while getting featured in newspapers alongside grinning politicians. It was a tactic of hiding in plain sight. You couldn't be merely viewed as a thug if you were frequently mingling with judges and film icons. It was a bold, in-your-face expression of authority that resonated with both the police and their adversaries, saying, "I am the lead character in this city. You're all just part of my story." 8. Al Capone. The man who bestowed upon Chicago its gruesome reputation for murder and chaos possessed a rather peculiar side business. He had an unusual obsession with milk. Seriously, it's true. Apparently, a relative fell ill from spoiled milk and Capone took it to heart. Thus, he acquired a dairy company and turned into an unexpectedly fearsome public health crusader. He managed to convince the city to mandate expiration dates on every milk carton. Can you even fathom that conversation? "Listen, Mr. Mayor, public health is crucial to me. Should this milk safety regulation fail to pass, your own well-being could be in jeopardy?" Using his typical mob tactics, he obliterated all competition, establishing a dairy monopoly founded on threats. With one hand, he was creating orphans, and with the other, he ensured their breakfast milk was safe and packed with calcium. The man was a living, breathing paradox of brutality. 9. When your existence is filled with incessant violence and sin, the notion of your eternal resume might start to weigh on you as life draws to a close. Mobster Dutch Schultz took this idea to a truly bizarre level. As he lay wounded in a hospital bed riddled with bullets from enemy gang members, he frantically sought to make amends with the divine. He insisted that a priest be summoned to his bedside for an emergency baptism. This is quite extraordinary considering he spent his life engaging in extortion, murder, and likely shaking down the local church for protection. It turned out to be one of the most awkward religious conversions ever. Was it a moment of true repentance, or simply the ultimate Hail Mary attempt? A desperate move to exploit a loophole in the commandment against murder. Regardless, he was attempting to secure his standing with God at the final moment possible. 10. The duality of these individuals was legendary, particularly within their own homes. Numerous mob bosses created a pattern of being absurdly authoritarian fathers, enforcing a bizarrely strict 1,950 seconds television dad version of family principles. Their days might consist of gunfights, extortion, and disposing of bodies in the river. But at home, the narrative shifted. "Junior, what did I instruct you about using foul language at the dinner table? Now pass the gravy before I must attend a business meeting that your mother would certainly disapprove of." Can you picture a morality lecture coming from someone who has far more blood on his hands than a careless surgeon? It was an illusory effort to separate their monstrous professional lives from the pure ideal family life they encountered under one roof. The cognitive dissonance was simply staggering. 11. When gangsters encountered issues, they didn't scream or resort to violence first. Naya, they secured a table. Welcome to the sit-down, the Mafia's preferred version of a business meeting, but with more espresso and a slightly heightened threat of being thrown into a river. These gatherings were quite serious in nature, with established rules: no yelling, no interruptions, and absolutely no weapons on display unless they coordinated with your outfit. They would meet at the rear of an eatery, leisurely sipping on tiny cups of coffee as they discussed matters such as, who has the right to operate illegal dice games on 43rd Street, Tony? If I may say so, Your crew is trespassing on my territory. And by the way, your linguine is overcooked. These conversations could stretch on for hours. Afterwards, they would embrace like over-enthusiastic soccer dads following a nail-biting match. It was a blend of The Godfather colliding with a Sunday brunch atmosphere. 12 gangsters recognized the strength of soft power, regularly practicing the art of being incredibly generous tippers. Al Capone was legendary for distributing $100 bills to waitstaff, coat check attendants, and anyone who provided him with a minor service. Back in the 1,920 seconds, that was akin to tipping your barista with a brand new automobile. This wasn't simply about flaunting his riches, though he relished doing so. It was a strategic maneuver, intimidation generously cloaked in charm. It secured loyalty, guaranteed discretion, and crafted a reputation as a benevolent man of the people. Because if the waiter adored him, that was fantastic. But if he disliked him, he still couldn't afford to spill his coffee. Serving a gangster meant that you were effectively on his payroll, whether you liked it or not. The criminal underworld had an unexpectedly tribal nature, with certain grudges proving detrimental to business. George Bugs Moran, a significant Irish-American adversary to Al Capone's Italian organization in Chicago, had a fanatical and self-destructive tendency to despise and distrust Italian gangsters. He was notoriously averse to collaborating with them, even when such a decision would have been strategically sound. His ingrained prejudice ultimately paved the way for his demise, as it hampered his potential alliances, and made him a straightforward target for the more organized and unified Italian syndicate. It appears that racism is not just morally indefensible, it also represents a dreadful business model. While Capone was constructing a diverse, multicultural crime empire, Moran was preoccupied with the annihilation of his entire crew on Valentine's Day simply because he refused to cooperate with others. You might assume gangsters despised lawyers, right? In reality, they merely disliked getting caught. However, utilizing the legal system was more of a pastime. One individual even sued a publication for labeling him pudgy, not a killer, nor dangerous, just pudgy, and he won the case. Another litigated against a rival gang due to them imitating his extortion technique. Envision two men dressed in $3,000 suits disputing before a judge over who originated the art of threatening individuals with a baseball bat. It was akin to Shark Tank merging with Judge Judy, but with significantly more pinstripes. They would enter the courtroom with an air of sophistication, behaving like Fortune 500 CEOs. Your Honor, my client is profoundly offended that his illicit moonshine was deemed swill. It's artisanal in nature. And the craziest part? Some judges genuinely took them earnestly. The American legal system has now welcomed mob drama since 1920. The Tommy gun was not merely a firearm, it represented the gangster's equivalent of a designer handbag. Loud, ostentatious, prohibitively expensive, and entirely impractical. These men carried them not out of necessity but because they had the means to do so. It was less about declaring "I'm here to shoot" and more like, "Look at how glossy this piece is." Some even boasted custom woodwork. One had mother-of-pearl inlays, another displayed a tiny golden charm dangling off the barrel as if it were part of a fashion statement. But make it high fashion. And let's be honest, they often struggled to aim these weapons accurately. Frequently, they struck more parked vehicles than adversaries. But that was inconsequential. The instant you brandished a Tommy gun, the implications were unmistakable. I'm wealthy, I'm hazardous, and I possess absolutely no respect for subtlety or the concept of hearing loss. Amidst all the turmoil, fear, and mayhem, several of the toughest mobsters harbored an unexpectedly gentle and peculiar fascination. They were captivated by the breeding and racing of pigeons. No joke. Top-level psychopaths like Lucky Luciano and Mike the Boss Tetti would dedicate countless hours on the roofs of their buildings nurturing their birds, cooing lovingly at them and entering them into competitions. For men whose lives revolved around constant anxiety and the perpetual danger of a bullet to the skull, this hobby provided a peculiar and tranquil refuge. The same hands that approved death sentences would tenderly cradle a pigeon. It's a surreal image that highlights the fact that even the most hardened criminals retain their own quirks. Complex individuals. Individuals with an abundance of birdseed. 17. The paranoia surrounding a high-ranking gangster was nothing short of legendary, and it extended beyond just firearms. It reached all the way to the dining room table. The most formidable bosses, such as Frank Costello, developed an exceedingly strange routine of hiring a personal food taster. Let that resonate for a moment. This isn't a medieval sovereign fretting over the potential poisoning from a rival leader. This is a man from Brooklyn who amassed his wealth by selling illicit alcohol, living in fear that his plate of spaghetti might turn out to be his final meal. Before the boss enjoyed even a bite of his steak or a sip of his wine, some unfortunate soul had to sample it first to ensure it wasn't contaminated with arsenic. It signifies having truly reached the pinnacle of success. You've gained such prominence that someone else must risk severe gastrointestinal distress or worse, just so you can dine without worry. Trust was a luxury they simply couldn't afford, especially concerning ravioli. 18. Appearances mattered immensely, and a gangster's suit served as his uniform. Yet these individuals took it a step further by combining style with crime. They retained a personal tailor on their staff. These skilled craftsmen weren't merely there to make them look sharp for an opera evening. Their main and far more crucial role was to custom tailor their expensive suits with concealed compartments, reinforced pockets designed to hold heavy firearms, and specially crafted holsters that preserved the jacket's elegant silhouette. Your tailor wasn't merely enhancing your appearance. He was integral to your operational safety. It was fashion with deadly seriousness. The aim was to appear stylish enough to grace the cover of a magazine while being prepared to shoot someone at any given moment without wrinkling your lapel. 19. You might assume the ultimate display of power is a successful hit, but you'd be mistaken. The real show of strength was turning a funeral into a grand public relations event. When a notable gangster passed away, whether from a rival's bullet or a disastrous cannoli, it became customary to host the most lavish, extravagant funeral conceivable. We're talking about golden caskets priced higher than a home funeral processions that extended for miles, and an abundance of floral displays that filled the entire church with the scent of a perfume factory explosion. It resembled a state funeral for a man likely infamous for feeding his foes to pigs. This wasn't merely about grief. It was a final defiant exhibition of dominance. It was a spectacle aimed to remind the city, the authorities, and their adversaries just how significant they were, even in death. 20. Let's discuss the pinky ring, the most extravagant piece of jewelry in gangster history. It wasn't merely a ring. It embodied a personality, a way of life, a small, shimmering proclamation that declared, "Yes, I engage in criminal activities, but I also possess style." Some of these rings were so large they could reflect sunlight into passing aircraft. One individual possessed a diamond so hefty it caused his hand to tilt slightly while he spoke. Another had initials engraved on it. Not his own initials, but those of his dog. And heaven forbid the person who inadvertently shook a mobster's hand too vigorously and marred the polish. The pinky ring was revered. It was also surprisingly multifunctional. Need to scare someone? Tap it loudly against a table. Need to stir your espresso? Guess what's going in the cup? It was fashion. It served a purpose. It was criminal bling at its finest. 21. What do you do when the law is closing in and your image is plastered on every wanted poster in the nation? If you're a gangster, you cultivate the habit of attempting to alter your appearance, often with disastrous and gruesome outcomes. The infamous bank robber, John Dillinger, a contemporary of the mobsters, took this to an extreme. He hired a back alley doctor to perform facial plastic surgery and even attempted to use acid to burn off his fingerprints. It was a failed effort. He ended up in excruciating pain with a slightly altered esthetes, misshapen face, and fingerprints that remained easily recognizable. Other fugitives resorted to clumsy disguises like cheap wigs and fake mustaches, which only made them appear more dubious. It was a desperate, vain effort to vanish that usually resulted in them resembling a poor actor in a school production. 22. In the mob, receiving a gift from the boss frequently wasn't a positive sign. In fact, acquiring a brand new car from someone like Al Capone was a trend that often carried a chilling ulterior motive. It wasn't a generous gesture. It served as a warning disguised as a gift. A present from Al could signify a variety of unsettling things, none of which were pleasant. It might suggest you had become his possession, a living, breathing extension of his assets. It could imply you were being tagged with the vehicle, acting as a locator for his hired enforcers, or, in the gravest scenario, it indicated the car was set to detonate at the turn of the ignition. You can picture the recipient's forced grin. "Oh, Al, truly you shouldn't have." Honestly, I think I'll just prefer to walk. No way. Mobsters had no trust in banks whatsoever. Putting their illicitly earned cash into a legitimate financial establishment was regarded as sheer madness. This mentality resulted in the daily practice of carrying around staggering amounts of cash at all times. They often had thick bundles of bills, sometimes amounting to thousands of dollars, folded into what was commonly referred to as a Michigan bankroll. A hefty note like 100 on the outside for show, with lesser denominations concealed within. It was all about projecting an image. The flashy outer layer shouted affluence and authority, while the practical inner notes were for actual purchases. It resembled a criminal croissant, flaky and impressive on the outside, but filled with something less lavish within. It demonstrated that you were fluid, influential, and operating entirely outside the conventional system. No way. Some gangsters were obsessed with power, others were all about pastries. One notorious Prohibition leader had such a peculiar fixation that it deserved its own television series. He was utterly consumed by cannoli, not only consuming them, but also grading them, critiquing them, and holding full-blown cannoli competitions with his associates, akin to the Great British Bake Off, but with more gel in their hair and less clarity in their enunciation. He would stroll into bakeries attired in a three-piece suit, order a single cannoli, take a dramatic bite, and then declare, "Oh, too much ricotta. I've tasted superior ones in Jersey." And everyone around would nod reverently as though he had just recited a line from Shakespeare. Legend has it he once ended a relationship simply because she favored cream puffs. Imagine constructing a criminal empire only to jeopardize it over dessert choices. Yet hey, priorities. You cross the family. Maybe you'd get a break. But suggest that cannoli is merely satisfactory. Forget about it, no way. You would assume the fundamental rule of thriving as a criminal is to remain incognito. But you would be mistaken. The primary guideline, according to paranoid mobsters, was a seating arrangement. They adhered to a strict, non-negotiable protocol that every diner owner in Chicago and New York was well aware of: never ever sit with your back facing the entrance. Every self-respecting gangster had their designated spot. It was invariably a corner table offering a clear line of sight to the main entrance, with their back firmly pressed against a solid barrier. This strategy ensured visibility of any looming threats, whether they be rival gangs or law enforcement approaching from any direction, with nobody able to ambush you from behind. Every single meal, be it a simple dish of pasta or an extravagant steak feast, was approached as a tactical exercise. If you were the host and attempted to seat a gangster elsewhere, congratulations. You likely just inherited a very haunted establishment. No way. Beneath the menacing, cold-blooded facade of some of the toughest criminals around, there lay an unexpected soft side. They were fiercely affectionate towards their pets. Their tendency to pamper their animals was quite unsettling when juxtaposed with their treatment of fellow humans. Al Capone was famously fond of his dog, a Newfoundland named Duke. Other gangsters owned cats, birds, and sometimes even more exotic creatures, treating them like little furry monarchs. These pets frequently dined better than most of the gangsters' human minions, relishing steak dinners while the sentry on duty nibbled on a cold sandwich. It's a strange and profoundly humanizing contradiction. A man who would not hesitate to order a hit would then come home and devote an hour to snuggling his puppy. No way. One of the most ironic behaviors of Prohibition-era gangsters was their dedication to peddling the worst liquor imaginable. These were the individuals who battled and perished for the privilege to sell illicit booze, branding themselves as champions of personal liberty. Yet, when they finally secured the supply, what did they distribute? Horribly watered-down swill, often mixed with industrial alcohol paint thinner, and other charming concoctions to stretch their supply. People literally went blind or succumbed to death from consuming this toxic concoction. So while they toasted to the end of governmental overreach, their clientele was preoccupied with chemical contamination. This situation transcended mere crime. It turned into a do-it-yourself chemical warfare trial involving the entire public as unwilling participants. In the realm of mobsters, appearances could be incredibly deceiving. When they suggested a promotion, it might imply anything from taking command of a lucrative million-dollar operation to unexpectedly overseeing a fish market in a landlocked area. One unfortunate individual ended up being dispatched to manage affairs in North Dakota. There were no activities of any kind, just cattle and an abundance of snow. They provided him with a phony office, a fictitious secretary, and a phone that remained silent. It resembled a witness protection scenario, though, with better attire. The locals assumed he was some kind of meat quality inspector. In the meantime, he sat there day after day, in a fedora sipping espresso, waiting for directives that would inevitably never arrive. It was the mob's subtle way of stating, "We no longer have faith in you, yet we're too courteous to eliminate you today. Enjoy your newfound existence as the beef whisperer." Here's a quirk that shows even the most cunning criminals can act foolishly. Numerous mobsters evading the authorities developed an odd obsession with reinventing their identities. Not via clever concealment, but through sheer boldness. They would acquire counterfeit passports and identification, portraying the most ludicrous aliases imaginable. Sometimes they wouldn't even bother modifying their first name, opting only for a different last name. It's akin to Al Capone attempting to masquerade as Al Smith. Occasionally, they would establish a character so absurdly out of place that it ironically attracted more attention. Picture a 6'4" scarred enforcer attempting to convince individuals he's a touring poetry instructor. Such a level of overconfidence and lack of foresight frequently resulted in their downfall. Let's revisit the omerta, for it was more than merely a guideline. It was an all-consuming daily ritual that dictated every interaction. You didn't merely steer clear of discussing matters with the police. You refrained from any conversation about business with anyone at all. Even casually bringing up a crime to your spouse in your very own kitchen could lead to a swift, irreversible retirement. This culture of steadfast silence was upheld with brutal, bloody repercussions, fostering a world where everyone constantly monitored their words, whom they conversed with, and even what their attention fixated on. It was a state of relentless, ritualistic paranoia. The primary tenet of Mob Club was, you simply do not discuss Mob Club. The second rule was, if you dared to breach the first rule, you would vanish. Mobsters were tough individuals, no doubt, but also absolute drama queens. One of their more peculiar practices was hosting gatherings for entirely fabricated reasons. Not birthdays, not nuptials. We're speaking of celebrations such as 3 months since Jimmy's release from prison or Sal's new cigars smelling a whole lot less like trash. They would book an entire restaurant, hire a jazz ensemble, and raise toasts, like honoring Frankie for staying out of jail this week. Cue the standing ovation. They even crafted themed cakes. One infamous creation featured a cheesecake adorned with a hand-painted Tommy gun entirely made out of fondant. It's something truly remarkable to witness a room filled with gentlemen clad in pinstripe suits becoming emotional over cannoli and fictitious anniversaries. It's as though the Sopranos met a child's birthday bash. Only everyone's armed and somewhat tipsy. Who requires justification when you've got spirits and balloon animals? At times, mobsters became so engrossed in their facade of business that they lost sight of their criminal reality. One group established a consulting firm charging fellow criminals for strategic advice. Genuine guidance like seminars. Imagine this. A smoky chamber, 10 men with slicked back hair and pinky rings alongside a flip chart stating, Step 1, don't get apprehended. They even produced business cards. Vito Mancini, strategic problem solver. Their clientele consisted of other mobsters who willingly spent thousands to hear, change your license plate and perhaps avoid shooting anyone in view of a police officer. It resembled a TED Talk, but with significantly more chain smoking and fewer PowerPoint presentations. One individual attempted to trademark his abduction method. Another introduced a loyalty program. Every fifth extortion is complimentary. Honestly, it was not organized crime. It was disorganized consulting. Lastly, let's revisit the business cards. Capone's used furniture dealer card was a true classic. However, this was a common practice. Other mobsters would flaunt cards identifying themselves as sales representatives, import-export experts, or my personal favorite, artificiados. These individuals, who couldn't tell a Picasso from a slice of pizza, were distributing cards that claimed they were experts in fine art. It epitomized their detached perception of reality. They envisioned themselves not as criminals, but as respectable, refined entrepreneurs who merely settled their business disagreements with a Tommy gun. It was a total illusion, yet it was a delusion they wholeheartedly embraced. 9 aspirations in one. So, there you have it. Beneath the fedoras and gunfights were deeply superstitious, paranoid, and often absurdly trivial men. Their existence was an extraordinary fusion of intense brutality and even more intense eccentricity. Now, I must ask you, which of these behaviors strikes you as the most ridiculously astonishing? And which contemporary CEO or celebrity do you believe secretly exhibits some habits reminiscent of Prohibition-era gangsters? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this peculiar journey through the shadowy passages of history, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who finds history dull, and hit that subscribe button with notifications enabled so you don't miss what we unveil next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next installment.